The season has gotten off to a bit of an uneven start for the New York Rangers, but they bounced back with a big win in Seattle on Saturday. John Chik of Locked On New York Rangers is here to talk about what's going on Broadway next on the Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome, everybody, to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you can get new episodes as soon as they drop. And you can find us now on SiriusXM on the SXM app. Just do a search for Locked On NHL. Today's episode is brought to you by Sleeper. Download the Sleeper app and use promo code LOCKEDONNHL. You can get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. It is great to welcome back to the show the host of Locked On New York Rangers, John Chik. And John, let's start with the big guns first. I know it's a small sample size. We're early in the season, but what's going on with Igor Shesterkin so far?
You know, I think in the most recent game, or second most recent game now against the Predators, he just didn't have his A game. But honestly, you could say the same thing for the entire team. Through 3 games of this season, I don't think anything was necessarily perfect for the Rangers. Obviously, they got a new coach, learning a new system, the whole 9 yards. And, you know, not everything firing on all cylinders, but finding a way to get it done, finding a way to win. And in the game against the Predators, I mean, for one reason or another, they just could not get out of first gear. They were kind of outworked the entire night. I know the Predators themselves were coming off of a pretty embarrassing 6-1 loss to the Oilers. So maybe that was kind of their gut check game and the Rangers just weren't ready for that. I'm not really sure what the reason was, but Igor was one of many, many players on that night that did not have his A game. I thought Igor, though, in the game against the Coyotes was absolutely fantastic. And, you know, some people might hear that and say, oh, it's the Coyotes. The Coyotes look better to me in that game than I've seen them look in a long time. I know they beat the Devils right before that, and I think they beat the Blues right after that. So that game was an absolute battle, and Igor was fantastic in that game. He looked like vintage Igor Shesterkin. There was a long 3-on-2. In fact, I think it was a full 2 minutes of a 5-on-3, where the Rangers successfully killed it off against the Coyotes, and Igor made some fantastic saves there. And, you know, overall, like I said, his goals against average probably isn't good right now because he's had 2 games where he gave up a decent amount of goals, but he's not somebody I worry about at all. I think overall he has played well this season. Like I said, nobody had it against the Predators, so I'll just kind of put that in the category of, you know, burn the tape and move on. So, yeah, no worries about Igor thus far.
All right. On Saturday, a win in Seattle over the Kraken. Obviously, you know, those West Coast road swings are a little tricky, but kind of strange goings on with the lights kind of partially going out, and yet the Rangers get it done in the dark.
Yeah, kind of a strange situation there. I mean, that's kind of a newer arena, right? You know, you would think that of all the arenas to have the lights go off, that would probably be the last one. Yeah, just one of those things that can happen during the course of a hockey game. And, you know, overall, I think the Rangers played well in that game. Obviously, Artemi Panarin scores twice. And I feel like something he's doing more this season is something that I've talked about on my podcast. And certainly I'm not the only Ranger fan that feels this way, but just wanting him to shoot more. You know, he's such a great passer. And he's so selfless, and he's just such a likable guy. And I have no doubt that Panarin would rather set up his teammates to score than score himself. But, hey, sometimes you got to be a little bit selfish. An example I always use when it comes to that is a couple of years ago, Game 7 overtime against the Penguins. I'll bring this up on the podcast every now and then. I'm kind of joking, but I'm kind of serious. Like, I'm glad he decided to be selfish in that moment there, because if he doesn't shoot, he tries to force a pass somewhere. Who knows what happens in that game? But I also kind of get the feeling that could be the coaching staff. That could be Laviolette telling him, hey, we want you to shoot the puck a little bit more. Yeah, he's a great passer. He's a great shooter too. So sometimes instead of trying to force that pass through a bunch of traffic, just shoot the puck. And obviously it worked out for him last night.
You mentioned Laviolette, obviously the coaching change. What do you see, both good and bad, so far in the new regime and how they're going about things?
Yeah, I think with Laviolette, he's somebody that's a little bit more hands-on than Gerard Gallant was. And let me say, I'm not one of those Ranger fans that was totally against Gallant from the second he got here. I'll always be appreciative of, him turning this team around, getting them pointed in the right direction. That run to the Eastern Conference Final when everybody thought they were still rebuilding, one of the most fun seasons I've ever had as a fan of this team. But obviously they made the change. And Laviolette, overall, I think the thing that a lot of Ranger fans are going to get on board with Laviolette is the fact that he's basically kind of turning the kids loose this season. With Gallant, they would sporadically appear in the top 6, but then, he'd kind of run out of faith in them and he'd rather go with a veteran there and they'd drop back down. And you could somewhat understand that sometimes when the three of them play together. I'm talking about Kakko, Lafreniere, and Hedel. The three of them play very well together. But by that same token, eventually you got to take the training wheels off a little bit. I think Laviolette has done that. And all three of those guys played great in this game last night. They've been a little bit up and down to start the season, but you got Hedel and Lafreniere both playing with Panarin. Naturally, their numbers are going to improve. We've seen multiple examples of that. Anybody that plays with Panarin, their numbers are going to go up. And Kakko had some success in limited time with Mika and Kreider last season. I think that's going to continue this season as well. He had a nice game last night too.
Again, we're early in the season, just in the second week, but what do you like the most about what you've seen from this team this year so far?
It's a good question. I would say that it's just the fact that there's going to be a lot of accountability, and it's the fact that they seem a little bit more structured this season. One example I can use of that was opening night against Buffalo. They basically suffocated them, and Buffalo's kind of a team that's up and coming, and they got a few more scoring threats now than they used to. They were kind of going with this 1-3-1, almost like a modern day trap, so to speak. And there were times where, Buffalo, they would have the puck in their own zone, and the Rangers would be kind of sitting back in the neutral zone, and they just had no idea how to attack it. They didn't know whether to try to skate through everybody, get the red line and dump it, try to, start a rush up the ice. They just had no answers for it. And I think you saw some of that in the game against Seattle last night as well. Jonathan Quick, he played very well. But obviously the Rangers defended very well in that game additionally. So overall, again, the only game that really just kind of was rough was the game against the Predators. I would say 4 out of 5 of the games they've played so far, they played pretty well. I know some people might look at the 5-3 loss to Columbus, but if you watch that game, the Rangers had the better of play in that game. It's one of those nights where the puck just would not go in the net and just didn't get any favorable bounces. But overall, through 5 games, hasn't been perfect, but I think I'm feeling pretty good, and I think a lot of Ranger fans would probably agree.
And what do you think needs to be worked on the most after the first 5 games?
Yeah, I would say, again, it's 5 games. It's hard to, always know for sure, what's kind of a fluke and what could be a developing trend. There were a couple of times, though, where I feel like they've taken some penalties that they don't really need to take. Look, if somebody's going toward your net and they've got a great chance and you hook them, you can understand that. But, when you're trying to lift somebody's stick in the offensive zone and you whack them in the head with it, it's, you get a high sticking penalty. It's like, come on, man. You can't be doing that. So that, maybe a little bit more disciplined and really, really slow start. Like I said, against Nashville, that was really their one bad game. And that was something that happened a little bit too frequently last season. And again, it's too early to know if that was just a fluke against the Preds. 82 games, it's going to happen once in a while, but we just don't want it to become a habit. So that's something to keep an eye on going forward. That's something the Rangers have to correct from last season, just getting off to better starts in games.
And after 5 games, what is the biggest surprise to you that you've seen from this team?
Biggest surprise. I would say just probably the overall team defense has been very good. I think they've mostly supported Igor Shesterkin. To go to an individual player here, I will say Erik Gustafsson. Obviously, the Rangers in free agency, they had precious little cap space to work with. They signed 10 or 11 free agents the first couple of days. Some of them are in the minors, obviously. But they didn't sign anybody for more than $900K. Nobody had more than 6 figures. So you got to kind of go discount shopping. And Erik Gustafsson has stepped in there. The one night Lindgren was out of the lineup, so Gustafsson played with Adam Fox. He looked great there. He's somebody that they've gone to on the power play a little bit. And for somebody that kind of has a rep as an offensive defense, and I've been impressed by some of the defensive plays that he's made as well. So overall, I think that's a pretty nice pickup for the Rangers. And again, we don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves. It's early in the season here. But as far as free agents go around the league, show me another guy making 6 figures this year on a new team that has gotten off to a better start than Erik Gustafsson. I'm not so sure that player is out there anywhere.
Not so sure either. All right, John, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
Yes. So anywhere you're listening to or watching this podcast, obviously we're on YouTube now. You can check us out there. Any audio streaming platform, you can find Locked On Rangers there as well. You can follow me on Twitter at JChik17 and also the podcast at _NY_Rainers, also on Twitter. So yeah, we're not hard to find. Like I said, anywhere you're watching or listening to this, you can find us there as well.
All right, John, thanks so much. Always a pleasure.
All right. Thanks for having me, Gil.
Your favorite player scores a hat trick. Your favorite team wins the Stanley Cup. And if you want to win 100 times your money, play daily fantasy hockey on the Sleeper app. These are all possible scenarios for this season. But to have a chance at winning big, you need to play daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper. As the official daily fantasy app of Locked On NHL, Sleeper is our top choice for daily fantasy sports, especially daily fantasy hockey. With Sleeper, you can win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy hockey contests. With studs like Connor McDavid, Alexander Ovechkin, Sidney Crosby, Cale Makar, all you need to do is pick more or less on stats for these stars or any player. Just choose stats like goals, assists, saves, plus minus, and more. You heard me, hockey fans. 100 times payouts on Sleeper, so start paying attention and get your picks right so you can win big. Use the promo code LOCKEDONNHL and you'll get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's Locked On NHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details.